Dave Smith spent most of this debate trying not to scream as Andrew Wilson kept circling back to libertarian incest hypotheticals. Apparently, in Andrew Wilson's world, without government enforcing morality, family reunions quickly become orgies. Dave Smith argues that big government fuels degeneracy, but hey, maybe they can settle this on the Candace Owens podcast instead.
The ultimate question, and I do think that I could make the claim against that in the same way that you could. And I think we already established this, right? That we can both make the claim for the exact same reasons, because we believe in God and we believe in morality and we believe that this is immoral. So we both have the exact same ability to make the claim. But if we're talking about what your more, I think, broader point that you made there, that libertarianism leads to immorality, I think is completely wrong. And I think this is like kind of the most important fundamental miscalculation that a lot of people on the right who reject libertarianism make. The idea that, well, freedom and liberty is really what leads to degeneracy. And that's just not true. And in fact, empirically and logically, we can look at the situation, particularly the situation of the United States of America, and go, look, as the government has grown bigger and bigger, you've seen degeneracy get more and more out of control. And I understand why there is a movement against degeneracy. I understand we live in a moment right now where I think our society is essentially disintegrating. And
we're 47 minutes in. This is where I would have started the debate if I were Dave Smith. He's back on point here.
I think that that's one of the things that, Andrew, you kind of are, I don't know, prominent for pointing out.
Shout out to Broken Traditions in the chat. If he's East Coast, it's early morning. What's up?
Disintegration of values and norms all throughout.
But the reason I believe that those values and norms are being eroded is because of libertarians and social leftist elites who often will move towards this principle of non-aggression. They just do it in two different ways. The way one, which libertarian does it, is by saying, if I'm not violating you and your non-aggression principle in some way, then you really have no claim to tell me to do anything, and everything is affirmed through private property. The leftist just affirms it the opposite direction, says there's no such thing as private property, but they apply the same principle of, if I'm not hurting anybody, then what's the problem? And so as we dive into what is the non-aggression principle, the non-aggression principle is the principle that if you are not aggressing against somebody else and you own yourself, they cannot aggress against you. So via consent, you cannot utilize the state, Dave, to have them go and break up an incest family who is all consenting with each other and having orgies nightly. You can't do it.
I understand that's your perspective on this, but that has nothing to do with what I'm getting into. So actually what the non-aggression principle implies is that at best, government ought to be severely restricted, and at worst, the government ought to not exist at all. Now, as we've had the rise in government, and I mean, look, in the United States of America, just in the last 20 years, in the last 20 plus years, which we could go back a lot further than that, you've had a tremendous growth in the size of government. And what happens as the government gets bigger and bigger is that all of the things that Christians and traditionalists tend to value get undermined. And so this institution of the government that is inherently based on violating the non-aggression principle does its absolute best to replace, take over, and monopolize all of the areas where traditionally family and community had domain. And
yeah, but why would that be problematic if the non-aggression principle logically should be ignored for these moral oughts? That's that is the question.
Well, hold on. That's a separate question. The point I'm making is that it's not an outgrowth of the non-aggression principle. It's an outgrowth of a rejection of the non-aggression principle. That's actually what leads to all of this.
So then if we were to have the non-aggression principle with a shrunken government, Are we still going to use the government in order to aggress against consenting adults who want to have incest or not?
As long as a government exists, it will be used to aggress against non-consenting adults. And
Great.
Yes.
Then
I don't know.
Yes.
Listen, Andrew, you're trying to obsess over this incest argument. Okay.
It's foundational.
Laws against incest. I'll grant you that. Sure. Fine. Can we move on to any other topic now?
Yeah, but
we move on to talking about the state of the country as it actually exists.
Yeah, but this is the state of the country as it actually exists.
Well, hold on. It's pretty funny because we live under the most powerful centralized government in the history of the world. The biggest organization in the history of the world is the United States of America's federal government in Washington, D.C., spending over $6 trillion a year, employing millions of people with the capability of overthrowing regimes all around the world. And instead, the argument we're getting here is, but if there was no government, who would stop an adult brother and sister from fucking? That's kind of goofy, man. It doesn't really have anything to do with.
I just want to let you know that saying
it's
kind of goofy isn't an argument. You just said if we scale the government down to its umpteenth point of scale down, as long as there was still a government, you would want them to enforce action via violating the non-aggression principle for your preference. So if there was,
no, that's not what I said.
Well, it's Dave. It is. It's an entailment. If the government's really, really, really big and enforce it right now, and then you say, but if it was really, really small, we would still enforce that because you want to have those laws, then regardless of the size of government, the degeneracy is still going to exist, right? And it's still going to need to be enforced against regardless of the size of the government.
Wait, I'm sorry. Just can you rephrase the question? What is it exactly you're asking me?
I'm asking you, if we reach anarcho-utopia, we scale the government down.
I'm not for a utopia, but
okay.
So
but
whatever.
if we reach
what does that mean? He's not for a utopia. Maybe I don't fully understand where Dave Smith is. I'm surprised he said that.
Whatever you want as the ultimate, right? The government is now.
Well, what is his ideal? So for me, if I'm Andrew, I want to figure out what is your ideal government then?
Scaled down to the point where it's essentially gone, right? Would you still want enforcement against this kind of thing? And how could you have enforcement against it without a government?
What against what kind of thing?
Like incest or gay marriage or any of these degenerate actions?
Okay, well, I think there's a pretty big gap between incest and gay marriage, but I will say that I think there's a gap between that.
What is it?
But I think they're two different things.
Yeah, they're two different things, but they're the same as far as two consenting adults doing what they want, right?
Yeah, me and you doing this debate are also two consenting adults doing what they want, but there's a gap between those things. So anyway,
what does that have to do? I mean, it logically tracks that if we got, dude, you can't go on these long rambling diatribes, and I do 4 seconds.
Yeah. Andrew Wilson fans gonna light me up, but that's good. That's why I wanted to listen to it again. This has been now over 25 minutes, probably 30 minutes. Dave Smith has been struggling.
I do 4 seconds, and you go berserk. Just calm down. Let me ask the actual question.
Dude, come on, man. I asked you to clarify your question, and
I'm trying to clarify it so that you understand it.
But don't act like I'm going on these long rants and you're not talking. I mean,
well, you filibuster. You don't say that much, but I'm still willing to engage.
Oh, come on, Andrew.
I'm super concise. So I'm super concise. Okay. I'm going to get right to it, right, so that you understand what I'm saying to you. Okay. What I'm asking you is that the enforcement mechanism against this degeneracy, which you consider to be morally wrong, absent a state, are you still going to want an enforcement mechanism against these moral wrongs? You say, no, there's a big difference between incest and homosexual marriage or homosexual sex. However, the truth is
no, there's not.
That both of these things are exactly logically similar when it comes to two consenting adults doing what it is that they want when they want to do it without hurting anybody else. How's that not the case?
Well, again, as I just pointed out, we're also two consenting adults doing what we want without hurting anyone else, but I think that's very different. So I'm just saying that I'm not even saying I support either of those things. I'm saying I see them as
it's not good.
Different.
From Dave, not good.
The truth is that if we didn't have what we have today And this is what happens with every very powerful centralized government, is that their biggest enemy becomes the family, the church, the community, because they don't like things that compete with them. If we actually got rid of all of the impediments between that, you would see an enormous return to normalcy in this country. You would see, I mean, look, starting in even...
Historian Tom Woods says rejecting liberty as a cure for degeneracy is like trying to put out fire with gasoline, dangerous and dead wrong. Do you side with Andrew Wilson's take or Dave Smith's libertarian stance on government, morality, and degeneracy? Sound off on Discord or down in comments. This is After Show Carnage.
And family